Most people think Cleopatra's power came from beauty. Some think it came from politics. But the thing Rome feared most was neither. It was information, because Cleopatra controlled the largest concentration of knowledge in the ancient world. And if that's true, Rome didn't just conquer Egypt. They inherited the most valuable intelligence network on Earth. For centuries, we've been told that Cleopatra's story was about beauty. The seductive queen, the tragic romance, the woman who brought down powerful men. But what if the most important thing Cleopatra ever controlled had nothing to do with her appearance? What if the real source of her power was information? Because when Cleopatra became ruler of Egypt, she inherited something no other leader on earth possessed. Not the largest army, not the greatest empire, not the most territory, knowledge, an almost unimaginable amount of knowledge, and that changes everything. Because Cleopatra didn't rule from some isolated desert kingdom. She ruled from Alexandria, the most intellectually advanced city in the world, a city that had become the center of science, mathematics, medicine, engineering, astronomy, geography, philosophy, and statecraft, the place where scholars came to study the secrets of civilization itself. At the center of Alexandria stood the most famous institution in human history, the Library of Alexandria. Today, people talk about it as if it were simply a building full of books. It wasn't. It was something much bigger. The library functioned as the ancient world's equivalent of a university, research center, intelligence archive, scientific institute, and think tank combined. Its mission was simple: collect everything, every scroll, every discovery, every map, every medical text, every piece of knowledge from every civilization they could reach. If a ship arrived in Alexandria carrying books, the books were copied. If a scholar discovered something new, it was preserved. If a kingdom possessed valuable information, Egypt wanted it. The goal wasn't education, the goal was intellectual dominance, and for centuries it worked. By Cleopatra's lifetime, Alexandria had become the closest thing the ancient world had to a global brain. Think about that. While much of the world struggled with regional communication, Egypt was collecting information from 3 continents. Knowledge flowed into Alexandria from Greece, from Persia, from North Africa, from Mesopotamia, from India, possibly even beyond. And Cleopatra inherited access to all of it, which helps explain something historians often overlook. Why was Cleopatra so different from most rulers of her era? Because she wasn't educated like most rulers. She was educated in Alexandria, the greatest intellectual center on earth. Ancient sources describe Cleopatra as exceptionally intelligent, not just intelligent by royal standards, exceptionally intelligent by any standard. She spoke multiple languages fluently. Some ancient accounts claim as many as 9. Unlike many rulers who relied on translators, Cleopatra could communicate directly with diplomats, merchants, military leaders, and foreign envoys. That alone was extraordinary. But language was only the beginning. She was educated in mathematics, philosophy, medicine, rhetoric, political theory, economics, navigation, history. She wasn't merely consuming knowledge, she was being trained to use it, and that made her dangerous. Because information is power. It always has been. Most rulers controlled territory. Cleopatra controlled information about territory. Most rulers controlled armies. Cleopatra understood the economics that supplied armies. Most rulers reacted to events. Cleopatra often anticipated them. And once you understand that, her relationships with Caesar and Antony start looking very different. The traditional story says she seduced powerful men, but powerful men are approached by attractive people constantly. What they rarely encounter is someone who understands power as well as they do. Or better. Julius Caesar wasn't interested in Cleopatra because she was beautiful. Rome was full of beautiful women. Caesar was interested because she was useful, because she understood things other rulers didn't, because Egypt represented wealth, stability, intelligence networks, and strategic resources, because Cleopatra knew how to solve problems. And that is infinitely more valuable than beauty. The same is true of Mark Antony. When Antony met Cleopatra, he wasn't encountering a helpless queen. He was encountering one of the most educated political operators in the Mediterranean world, a ruler with resources, knowledge, leverage, connections, intelligence, everything required to influence outcomes. That doesn't fit the romantic narrative, but it fits reality. And reality is usually more interesting, because once you strip away the mythology, Cleopatra starts looking less like a seductress and more like a CEO, a strategist, a leader managing one of the most sophisticated systems on earth. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If information was part of Cleopatra's power, what happened when Rome took Egypt? The answer is fascinating. Rome inherited everything: the wealth, the grain, the ports, the trade routes, the bureaucracy, the records, the archives, the knowledge. Augustus didn't conquer some remote kingdom. He absorbed the most advanced administrative and intellectual system in the Mediterranean. And that may explain why Rome transformed so rapidly afterward. Because empires don't just conquer land, they conquer expertise. The Romans were brilliant administrators, but Egypt had been managing complex civilization for thousands of years before Rome became dominant. The transfer of knowledge mattered, and that's where Cleopatra's story becomes bigger than Cleopatra herself, because her defeat wasn't merely the fall of a queen, it was the transfer of civilization, a handoff from one world to another, the last independent great power of the ancient Mediterranean falling into Roman hands. And when that happened, history changed direction. But there's another layer, one that's even more disturbing. Because Rome didn't simply inherit Egypt's knowledge, it also inherited control over the story, and whoever controls information controls memory. Suddenly, the people deciding how Cleopatra would be remembered were the people who defeated her. Think about how dangerous that is. Imagine your greatest enemy becoming your biographer. Imagine your competitors writing your obituary. Imagine the people who benefited from your destruction deciding how future generations would understand you. That's exactly what happened, and over time, something extraordinary occurred. Cleopatra's intelligence slowly disappeared from the story. Her education disappeared. Her strategic abilities disappeared. Her political skill disappeared. The library disappeared. Alexandria disappeared. The systems she managed disappeared. And what remained? Beauty, romance, drama, emotion, the safest version of Cleopatra, the least threatening version, the easiest version to dismiss, a ruler transformed into a stereotype. And because that stereotype was repeated for centuries, most people never noticed what was missing: the knowledge, the competence, the intellect, the reason powerful men took her seriously in the first place, which may be the greatest propaganda victory Rome ever achieved. Not convincing people Cleopatra lost, convincing people she was never dangerous to begin with. Because dangerous people leave lessons. Beautiful people leave stories. Rome preferred stories. Stories are easier to control. But history leaves clues. And when you follow those clues backward, a different Cleopatra emerges. A woman educated in the greatest intellectual center on earth. A ruler who understood information. A strategist who leveraged knowledge. A leader operating in one of history's most complex environments. A queen who recognized that information was power long before the modern world rediscovered the idea. And maybe that's the real reason Rome feared her. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was charming, not because she was dramatic, but because she understood something every empire understands. The most powerful weapon isn't an army, it isn't money, it isn't territory, it's information. Because information shapes decisions, decisions shape power, and power shapes history. Cleopatra understood that, Rome understood that. And 2,000 years later, we're still living inside the story that won. Which raises one final question. If Rome could transform Cleopatra from one of the most intelligent rulers of the ancient world into a symbol of beauty and romance, what other stories have we inherited that were rewritten by the people who won? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, because history becomes much more interesting the moment you stop asking what happened and start asking who benefits from the version you've been told.